witches, it's Taya here, and today I wanted to have a chat about, well, sort of about my Book of Shadows, but not so much what goes in it, but what doesn't go in it. So just a bit of background, about a year ago, I decided, just over a year ago, that I wanted to do up like a fancy Book of Shadows, a like official big ass Book of Shadows. And I will go through it another day, but you can see it's sort of all filled out with all sorts of different information. I'm not quite halfway through the book yet, in about a year, so that's good. I've got lots of room to go, but there are some things that I don't include in my Book of Shadows. I do it as like it's sort of a journal of my journey. If I ever learn something that I then use in my practice, it goes in my Book of Shadows. So I also have other notebooks that I keep where it's sort of all the things I'm learning about that I'm like, oh, this is interesting, I want to do this. And then when I've actually done it, when it actually is completed, it's something that I'm like, yes, I will use this, it goes in the Book of Shadows. One thing that I do not put in my Book of Shadows is a list of correspondences. So I have this awesome big apothecary cabinet full of all sorts of herbs and things that I've sourced sort of locally. The only things I purchase online are mugwort and wormwood. Everything else are pretty much items that I have sourced here in my community. Things like dandelion leaves, dandelion flowers, dandelion root, lilacs, lilies, ferns, all kinds of different things, right, that I grow in my yard and that are available during the warmer months here in Canada in my area. So I do use correspondences, right? I don't do a ton of spell work, but I do some, and at times I need to have things that are accessible. I need to know what I'm working with. Now, in the age of the internet, there are correspondences everywhere and anywhere. And what I was finding is I would look something up and it would say one thing, but then I'd see it on a different site and it would say something totally different, or be similar, but it would have more detail or less detail. And it's kind of a little frustrating. So I decided I needed to single source my correspondences, right? Just pick a source and be like, hey, that's what I'm gonna go with. And what I found is this awesome book, the complete book of Llewellyn's complete book of correspondences. It's a comprehensive and cross-referenced resource for pagans and Wiccans, and I love this book. So it has got just about everything I could possibly want in here. It lists things like protection, love, like all those kind of things where you're like, oh, I need something for, and it lists and lists of herbs and trees and gemstones and colors and metals and gods and goddesses and you name it for that one single thing. And then it also does, it's got everything you could possibly want a correspondence for in here. It's got correspondences for different Sabbats during the year. It's got different moon phase correspondences. It's got gods and goddesses. It's got animals. It's got, you name it, it's in here. The elements, runes, the Ohum, like you name it, it's in this book and it has a correspondence for it. So rather than copying all this out into my Book of Shadows, this is a really thick book and that's going to take up a lot of room in my Book of Shadows. So what I do is I just keep this sort of as an addendum, and this is where I find all my correspondences. I don't write them down in my Book of Shadows per se. Now, every once in a while, I will run into something where I have found something really cool locally, and I'm like, oh, this is really neat. Like vetch. It's sort of a beautiful purple, flowery weed that grows out in kind of the common areas around my house. I love it. So I did go online, find correspondences for that. And then what I did was I just go in here and I add like I put a sticky note in the V section for vetch. And so I can go and always have that reference in here. So I add to this book, or I'll take notes in here of, if I find something and I'm like, oh, I really need to use this, I'll go and make a note of it. And and stuff like that. So I do use this as like a working book. It's not just a pretty reference book. I actually write in it. I will go ahead and use it for all sorts of different things. Sorry, just a little reminder there. I'll pop that down. So yeah, that's just a little bit about why I find I don't use correspondences in my Book of Shadows, because I do have a single reference book that I can use. So I'm not plugging up my book with lists and lists and lists that I find are never really comprehensive enough. Then when I go to do my spell work, what I do is I tend to look it up by what I'm looking for. So say it's protection. And I can go through that list, and there are usually 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 miscellaneous herbs and plants that I will have either in my apothecary cabinet or in my kitchen. I have a huge spice rack in my kitchen. So I'll be able to find what I'm looking for just by going there. It's something I will have. There's usually, like, I don't think I've ever run into a case where there wasn't something I had on hand. Maybe I don't have one of the gemstones on hand, but I can do something with the herbs. Or if I don't have an herb on hand, there might be a tree. And I'm like, oh, it's willow. I've got a willow tree in my front yard. I can go and pull some willow into what I'm working on. So I find just because it's so comprehensive, there's always, I've always got what I need to do my spell work, just having sourced everything locally. So yeah, just a little bit about what I don't put in my Book of Shadows. And if you're interested, leave a comment. Let me know if you'd like to see what's in my Book of Shadows, what I do include instead of what I don't include, and how I go about doing that, because I'd love to have a little chit chat if that's something people are interested in. All right, thanks so much for hanging out. Make sure you hit the subscribe button if you like this content. If you'd like to see, like to see us again, hang out in another video, I think that'd be cool. So yeah, mwah. Thank you so much, you guys. We'll see you again soon.